Captain Elias Ward could hear only his own breathing as he stumbled out of the wreckage of his small exploration ship. Smoke still rose from the broken hull, and a trail of black scars on the ground showed where the craft had slid before finally stopping. He touched his head and winced. Blood. Nothing too serious, but the crash had left him bruised. Sore, and alone. His helmet display flickered with warnings. Oxygen levels were fine for breathing, but his suit was low on power. He would need shelter, food, and a plan. He knew the rules of survival: assess, adapt, endure. He had been trained for emergencies, but deep inside he felt something else, a quiet fear. This was an uncharted planet, far beyond any known trade routes. Nobody even knew he was here. He looked at the landscape. The terrain stretched out in shades of gray and pale green. Strange plants swaying lightly in a cold breeze. Jagged stone towers rose like broken teeth from the ground, and beyond them, he could see the faint glow of a distant mountain range. It was an alien world, beautiful but hostile, and for a moment Elias felt very small. He gathered what he could from the wreck: a med kit, a small plasma cutter, and a flare gun. His rifle was missing, thrown somewhere during the crash. He would need to search for it later. For now, he focused on one thing: survival. As he walked away from the ship, his boots crunched over loose stones and dry soil. His visor detected heat signatures nearby. At first, he thought it was just the remains of the wreck, but then he saw it in the shadow of a massive stone outcrop. Something moved. Elias stopped. Heart pounding. It was enormous, at least 4 times the size, its pale white body standing out starkly against the darker rocks. The creature was like nothing he had seen before, its long neck arched low, wings folded tight against its body, and a tail coiled protectively around a small cluster of rocks. Its scales shimmered faintly in the dim light, and when its head turned, Elias saw its eyes, deep, intelligent eyes. It wasn't alone. Near the base of the creature, tucked close against its massive form, were 3 smaller shapes. Dragonlings, Elias realized. They were tiny compared to their mother, their movements slow and weak. They huddled together, making soft, high-pitched sounds as if calling for comfort. The larger creature shifted, and Elias noticed something else: her wings. They were broken badly. One wing bent at an unnatural angle, and the other was torn, with dry blood crusted along the edges. She was injured, grounded, and vulnerable. Yet even in her state, the alien dragon stared at him with a gaze that was both watchful and defensive. Elias took a slow step back. His instinct screamed at him to leave. This was a massive, unknown life form. It could crush him without effort. But then he looked again at the dragonlings. They were shaking, hungry, maybe cold, maybe scared. He thought about his crash, about his own helplessness. They weren't so different, were they? Both stranded, both fighting to survive. He raised his hands slowly, palms out, showing he held no weapon. Easy. He said softly, even though he knew it couldn't understand his words, "I'm not here to hurt you." The dragon let out a low rumbling sound, not a roar, more like a warning. But she didn't attack. Elias crouched, making himself smaller, less threatening. He remembered his training. When facing an unknown intelligent species, movements mattered more than words. He kept his eyes down, showing respect. Minutes passed. He stayed still. She stayed still. Finally, Elias noticed something strange: her breathing. It was labored, slow, painful. The metallic glint near her wing caught his attention. He squinted, and his stomach turned. A trap. It was mechanical, alien in design, but clearly meant to harm. A curved metal clamp was dug deep into the flesh of her wing, holding it tightly, likely preventing healing. Round the wound, the scales were discolored, swollen, and infected. Someone had done this to her. Elias swallowed hard. He now understood why she couldn't fly away. Whoever had set this trap had wanted her grounded. He glanced at her dragonlings. Without their mother's ability to hunt or defend them, their chance of survival was almost none. He thought about leaving, about finding water, shelter, food, but his feet didn't move. His conscience wouldn't let him. "Looks like we're both stuck here," he whispered to himself. He slowly reached into his bag and pulled out the med kit. It wasn't much, just basic supplies. Antiseptic, bandages, pain suppressors. He also had his plasma cutter, which could act as a tool for cutting metal. The dragon's eyes followed his every move. She tensed when he stood up again, wings twitching despite the pain. Elias held up the med kit, showing it to her. "I can help," he said, pointing to her wing. "You're hurt. Let me try." She tilted her head, as if studying him. Her dragonlings whimpered, and she lowered her head protectively over them, still unsure of his intentions. Elias took another step closer. Slowly, carefully. Her growl deepened. He froze. This was the moment. Either she would trust him, or she would end him. His hand shook slightly as he extended the med kit toward her. He kept his voice calm. "If you don't let me, you're not going to make it. Neither will they." Something in his tone must have reached her. The dragon blinked slowly, then hesitantly shifted her weight, just enough to expose the damaged wing. It wasn't a full gesture of trust, but it was enough. Elias exhaled, a shaky breath of relief. He walked closer until he could see the wound in full. It was worse than he thought. The trap was biting deep into her flesh, and he could smell the infection. She had been like this for days, maybe longer. "Hang on," he muttered. Kneeling beside her massive wing, Elias carefully set down the plasma cutter. He studied the device for a moment, calculating the safest way to remove the trap without causing further damage. The dragon let out a soft growl but didn't move. She was watching him with cautious eyes, waiting. And then, for the first time since the crash, Elias didn't feel alone. He was a human on an alien world. She was a wounded creature, protecting her young. Different species, different lives. But for this moment, they needed each other. "Let's get this thing off you," Elias whispered, activating the cutter. The quiet hum of the tool filled the still air. For the first time, hope sparked between them. The plasma cutter hissed softly as Elias worked, its thin beam glowing faintly against the metal trap. He kept his movements slow and steady, afraid of causing the dragon more pain. Every so often, he glanced up at her massive head, watching her reactions. Her eyes followed his hands with sharp intelligence. She understood he was trying to do something. The trap was cruelly designed. It had hooked deep into her flesh, leaving no easy way to remove it without cutting. Elias' stomach churned at the sight, but he pushed his feelings aside. He had done medical field work before on humans, not alien dragons, but pain was pain, and wounds needed care. "You've been through a lot," he said softly, knowing she wouldn't understand his words, but saying them anyway. "Let's make this quick." The dragon rumbled low in her chest, a sound that made the ground tremble. It wasn't a threat this time. It felt like a response. Elias kept talking as he worked, not for her understanding, but to calm himself. "You know, back home, we always thought dragons were just myths, big, powerful creatures people wrote stories about. Never thought I'd meet one, especially one who looks as pale and beautiful as you. You're like snow in the middle of a desert." She blinked slowly, and he almost thought she understood the tone of his voice. It took time, more than he expected. His hands grew sore as he cut through the alien metal bit by bit, careful not to let the plasma cutter touch her scales. The dragon barely moved, though sometimes her massive claws dug into the earth when the pain became too much. Elias paused. When that happened, letting her breathe before continuing. Finally, the trap came loose. Elias exhaled heavily and pulled the device free. The wound beneath it oozed, and the smell of infection hit him hard. He quickly grabbed his med kit, using antiseptic to clean what he could. He didn't know if human medicine would work on her biology, but it was better than nothing. "This will sting," he said, pouring the antiseptic on the wound. The dragon let out a deep growl, but didn't strike or move away. She stayed still, watching him with those deep, intelligent eyes. Elias wrapped the largest bandage he had around the base of her wing. It looked ridiculously small compared to her size, but it was something. He needed to find more materials to cover her injury, but for now, it would do. When he finished, he stepped back slowly. "That's it. You're free from that thing." The dragon turned her head toward the now removed trap. She sniffed it, then shifted her gaze back to Elias. For a long moment, they just stared at each other. Elias didn't know why, but he felt like she understood at least a little. He backed away, giving her space. The dragon stretched her injured wing carefully, testing its movement. She winced, pulling it back in. It would take time for her to heal, but at least the cruel device was gone. One of the dragonlings squeaked and waddled toward Elias. It was small, barely reaching his knees. With white-scaled skin like its mother, it sniffed his boots curiously, before scurrying back to her side. Elias chuckled softly. "You're welcome, little one," he said. He sat on a nearby rock to rest. His body ached, and his mind was still buzzing from the adrenaline. He had just treated an alien dragon. A part of him couldn't believe it. As he sat, his stomach growled. He hadn't eaten since the crash. The dragonlings made similar small noises, weak and pitiful. He guessed they were hungry too. He sighed. "Looks like I need to find food. For all of us." He stood and pointed at himself, then mimed eating, then gestured to the dragonlings. It was a ridiculous attempt at communication, but the mother dragon tilted her head as if watching curiously. "I'll be back," Elias said. Though he knew she couldn't understand, he grabbed his plasma cutter and his bag and began walking toward the plant-covered terrain. He scanned for anything that looked edible. His helmet had basic analysis software, but it was limited. It warned him which plants were likely toxic, but didn't identify safe ones easily. After an hour of searching, he managed to find some fruit-like growths on a strange tree. They were bright blue and soft to the touch. His helmet scan gave a weak reading, low toxicity. It wasn't a guarantee, but he was desperate. He took a cautious bite. The taste was bitter but not unbearable. His stomach didn't immediately rebel, which was a good sign. He gathered as many as he could carry and headed back. When he returned, the dragon was lying with her wings folded tight. The dragonlings curled against her for warmth. She raised her head as he approached, sniffing the air. "Brought food," he said, placing the fruits on the ground. One of the dragonlings crept toward him again, curious. Elias rolled one of the fruits its way. It sniffed it, then took a cautious bite. After a moment, it ate the whole thing. Encouraged, the other two dragonlings joined in, nibbling at the fruits. The mother dragon watched but didn't eat. Elias tossed one toward her gently. She caught it in her jaws, bit down, and swallowed. "Guess it's safe for you too," he said, smiling slightly. For the next few minutes, there was silence except for the soft chewing sounds of the dragonlings. Elias sat down a short distance away, eating his share. The alien sky was turning darker now, painted with streaks of purple and gold. Night would come soon, and with it, new dangers. He looked at the dragon. She was still watching him. Elias felt strange. For the first time since the crash, he didn't feel completely alone. He was sitting beside a massive alien beast, sharing food like companions. "Guess we're stuck with each other," he said softly. The dragon rumbled again, a low, almost gentle sound. Maybe, Elias thought, she really did understand. For now, that was enough. The night on this alien world was colder than Elias expected. The temperature dropped fast, and the thin air made it feel even sharper against his skin. He pulled his emergency blanket tight around himself, sitting close to the wreckage fire. He had managed to start with scraps from his ship. The fire gave off only a faint glow, but it was enough to keep him alive. The dragon, however, did not seem bothered by the cold. She had curled herself around her dragonlings like a living wall, her long tail wrapped protectively around them. Her white scales reflected the faint starlight, making her look like a ghostly guardian in the darkness. Elias kept glancing at her, still amazed by her presence. She was unlike anything he had ever seen. Powerful, majestic. And yet, at this moment, broken and grounded, he thought about the trap he had removed earlier. Someone had done that to her. Not just nature. Not an accident. Someone had hunted her. Elias rubbed his hands together. If there were hunters on this planet, then maybe his crash was not just bad luck. The thought made him uneasy. The dragon suddenly shifted her head, her golden eyes locking on him, Elias. froze for a moment. Even injured, she was still massive and dangerous. But instead of growling, she only studied him. "You still don't trust me, do you?" he said softly. She blinked slowly, and he took that as her answer. He didn't sleep much that night. Between the cold, the pain in his body, and the heavy feeling of being watched by a creature that could end him with a single strike, rest was impossible. Still, in a strange way, her presence made him feel safer than being alone. Morning came with a pale, dim light. Elias stretched his sore muscles and stood, brushing off the dust from his suit. He glanced at the dragon. She had shifted slightly during the night, but remained curled around her young. He needed to think ahead. Food and water, those were the priorities. He still had some fruits left from yesterday, but not enough for all of them to survive for long. The dragonlings looked a little more energetic, but they were still weak. Their mother needed to heal. If they were all going to make it through this, Elias walked toward the edge of the rocky outcrop. Scanning the landscape, he saw strange trees scattered in the distance, and beyond them, what looked like a shimmering patch of light water. He turned back to the dragon. "I need to check something. I'll be back." She tilted her head, as if following his words. Elias still wasn't sure how much she understood, but her eyes stayed on him until he left. It took him an hour to reach the source of the shimmering light. As he got closer, his helmet confirmed what he hoped: water. A shallow pond stretched across a small clearing, its surface calm. Strange insect-like creatures hovered above it. Dipping into the water every few seconds, Elias knelt and filled his canteen. He took a cautious sip. The helmet scanned the liquid as it entered his mouth. Not fully safe, but close enough. He could purify it later with the portable filters in his survival kit. He also noticed movement near the edge of the water. He crouched low, hiding behind a tree. Two figures stood on the far side of the pond. At first, Elias thought they were just tall, thin aliens gathering water. But then he noticed the weapons. Long rifles, dark armor, and devices on their belts. Hunters. His stomach tightened. They weren't human, but they were definitely intelligent. They moved with precision, scanning the area with handheld trackers. He couldn't hear their language clearly, but the way they gestured made it obvious. They were searching for something: the dragon. Elias' heart pounded. He stayed hidden, barely breathing until they finished whatever they were doing and walked off into the trees. When he was sure they were gone, he let out a shaky breath. So it was true. They were hunting her, and if they were close to the pond, they could easily track him too. Elias rushed back toward the dragon's nest, his boots crunching on the uneven ground. When he returned, the dragon immediately lifted her head, growling softly. He raised his hands quickly. "It's me, easy." She relaxed slightly, but her eyes narrowed as if sensing his alarm. Elias walked closer. "We're in trouble," he said, though mostly to himself. He set down the canteen near her. One of the dragonlings waddled over curiously, sniffing it. Elias smiled weakly. "Water. You'll need it." The dragon lowered her head and sniffed the container. Elias carefully poured some into a shallow rock crevice, making a small pool. The dragonlings lapped at it eagerly. The mother followed, taking a slow sip before pulling back. Elias watched her for a moment. Then he crouched down, meeting her gaze. "They're coming for you," he said quietly. "The ones who hurt you? They're close." Of course, she couldn't understand the words, but maybe she felt the urgency in his voice. The dragon rumbled deep in her chest, as if agreeing. She shifted her wings slightly, wincing in pain. Her injury made flight impossible. Elias realized what that meant. She couldn't run. He spent the rest of the day gathering what he could from his wreck. Scraps of metal, pieces of wiring, anything that could be used to build makeshift defenses. He created small noise traps out of loose debris and positioned them around the nest. They wouldn't stop armed hunters, but they would at least give a warning. He also searched the crash site again for his rifle. He found it wedged under a piece of torn metal. The sight of it gave him a small sense of relief. At least now he wasn't completely defenseless. As he worked, the dragon watched him. At first, he thought it was just curiosity, but then he noticed something else in her gaze: recognition. She understood he was preparing for something. Elias stopped, staring back at her. You get it, don't you? You know what's coming. The dragon blinked slowly, then lowered her head, resting it near the dragonlings. Elias sat beside the wreckage, staring out at the strange sky. He had come here as an explorer, ready for discovery. Now he was a stranded survivor, building defenses. Beside an alien dragon and her young, he didn't know what tomorrow would bring. But one thing was clear: if the hunters came, he would fight, not just for himself. The battle was over, but its marks remained everywhere. Scorched burns covered the rocks. Smoke rose from the places where energy blasts had struck. The ground was littered with broken armor and weapons. The smell of dust, blood, and burned metal still lingered in the air. Elias sat near the wreckage, his back against a jagged stone. His shoulder was tightly bandaged with strips from his emergency kit, though every movement still sent waves of pain through his body. He was tired beyond words, but they had survived. The dragon lay a short distance away. Her huge frame curled protectively around her dragonlings. Her breathing was deep and steady now, though her body bore new burns and wounds from the fight. Even so, she looked stronger than before. There was no fear in her golden eyes, only calm. Elias stared at her for a long moment. You're tougher than anything I've ever seen, he said softly. She blinked slowly, her head lowering slightly as if acknowledging his words. The next few days passed in a quiet rhythm. There were no more signs of hunters, perhaps the last. Battle had been enough to drive them away, or perhaps they were regrouping somewhere far away. Either way, Elias used the time to rest and recover. He spent hours repairing his damaged equipment and scavenging whatever he could from the fallen hunters. He collected their energy cells, removed parts from their weapons, and added them to his improvised defenses. If another fight came, he wanted to be ready, but mostly, he focused on healing. The dragon did the same. Her movements grew steadier each day, and her injured wing, while still stiff, looked less swollen. She began to stretch it carefully, testing its range. Elias could tell it wouldn't be long before she could fly again. The dragonlings, once weak and frightened, now played more boldly, chasing each other around the rocky outcrop. Their soft squeaks filled the air, bringing some warmth to the otherwise desolate place. Elias often watched them with a small smile. It felt strange. Days ago, he had been stranded, alone, and ready to die. Now, he felt like he had a purpose protecting them, even if it was only for a little while. One evening, as the alien sun dipped low and painted the sky in shades of purple and gold, Elias sat near the dragon. You know, he said softly, I was supposed to be part of a long exploration. Years, even, meeting new species, learning things no human had ever seen. I never thought this would be how it started. The dragon tilted her head, watching him closely. I don't know if anyone's coming for me, he admitted. Maybe they'll find the wreck. Maybe they won't. But even if they don't, he paused, exhaling slowly. I'm glad I met you. She blinked slowly, lowering her head closer to him. For a moment, Elias simply sat there, looking into her golden eyes. There was no language between them, no shared words, but he understood her in some way. She wasn't just a beast. She wasn't just surviving. She was more. The next morning, Elias awoke to a sound he hadn't heard before. The dragon was moving fully, stretching her wings. He sat up quickly, wincing at the pain in his shoulder. She was standing tall now, her wings slowly unfolding. They still looked damaged, but the strength in her movements was unmistakable. She was ready. Elias stood, brushing the dust from his suit. You're leaving, aren't you? The dragon turned, her head toward him. Her dragonlings gathered close, chirping softly as if sensing the moment to. He felt a lump form in his throat. He had known this would happen. She didn't belong here, grounded and hiding. She belonged in the sky, free. Elias stepped closer, resting his hand against a rock for balance. You don't need me anymore, he said quietly. That's good. That means I did my part. The dragon lowered her massive head until it was close to his chest. For a moment, Elias thought she was just sniffing him again, but then she stayed there, unmoving. As if memorizing him. It wasn't a goodbye in words. It was something deeper. Thank you, he whispered. She rumbled softly, a low, warm sound that echoed through the rocks. Then she moved. With a powerful motion, she spread her wings. They caught the alien wind, trembling slightly from the effort, but holding strong. The dragonlings squeaked, pressing against her legs. She nudged them gently with her snout, guiding them toward her side. Elias stepped back, giving her space. He felt strangely small as he watched her towering form preparing for flight. "You're going to make it," he said, his voice quiet but steady. "You'll keep them safe." She looked at him one last time, a long, unbroken stare. Then she bent her head low, almost like a bow. Elias froze, unsure if he was imagining it. But no, it was deliberate, a gesture of respect. He swallowed hard, his chest tight. "Goodbye," he whispered. With a mighty push, she leapt into the air. Her wings beat powerfully, sending dust and loose stones swirling around Elias. She rose higher, her dragonlings clinging to her back. Elias shielded his eyes as she soared above the outcrop, circling once. Then she roared, not a roar of pain or warning, but of triumph, a sound that echoed across the rocky landscape, strong and unbroken. Elias watched until she was only a pale shape against the sky. Then finally, she was gone. The silence that followed felt heavy, but not empty. Elias sat on a boulder, staring at the horizon. He didn't know what would come next. Maybe rescue, maybe years of survival alone. But for the first time since the crash, he didn't feel hopeless. He had done something that mattered. He had saved her, and in return, she had saved him too, not just from the hunters, but from the loneliness that had been eating away at him. Since the crash, he took a deep breath, feeling the alien wind against his face. Time to keep moving, he said softly to himself. With that, Elias gathered his supplies, adjusted his rifle over his shoulder, and started walking. The outcrop was empty now, but somewhere above, in the alien sky, a dragon and her young flew free. And that was enough. The air was tense. Elias could hear his own heartbeat as he crouched behind the barrier of scavenged plating, his rifle held tightly in both hands. The sun had dipped behind the jagged rocks, leaving the outcrop bathed in shadow. He could barely make out the distant silhouettes of the hunters moving across the rocky terrain, but their glowing visors gave them away. There were at least 8 of them now. Elias swallowed hard. This was no scouting team. This was a full hunting group, armed and ready, beside him. The dragon rose slowly, her massive body blocking part of the outcrop entrance. Her dragonlings whimpered and pressed against her side, but she didn't flinch. Her golden eyes burned with a quiet fury. "You feel it too," Elias whispered, glancing at her. "This is it," she rumbled softly, a low sound that vibrated through the stone. Elias tightened his grip on his rifle. He wasn't just fighting for himself anymore. He was fighting for her and her young. The first noise trap went off. The clanging sound echoed sharply through the outcrop, followed by a hiss of alien voices. Elias peeked through a gap in the rocks and saw the hunters carefully approaching, their rifles raised. He waited. Another noise trap snapped. More movement. They were spreading out, trying to surround the OUTC or OP. Elias exhaled slowly, steadying his breath. "Not today," he muttered. When the nearest hunter stepped past a reflective panel, Elias fired. The blast hit the hunter in the chest, sending him sprawling backward. Before the others could react, Elias shifted position and fired again, striking another in the leg. The dragon roared. The sound was thunderous, shaking the air. The hunters froze for a moment, startled by the sheer force of it. That hesitation cost them. The dragon lunged forward. Despite her pain, her massive claws slammed into the ground, sending a shockwave of dust and stone toward the advancing hunters. Her tail whipped violently, knocking one off his feet and hurling him into a rock wall. Elias used the chaos to fire again, hitting another hunter square in the shoulder. But they were fast. Within seconds, the remaining hunters returned fire. Energy bolts sizzled through the air, striking the rocks around Elias. One shot hit close enough to burn his arm, and he hissed in pain, ducking lower behind his makeshift barrier. He glanced at the dragon. She had taken several hits to her thick scales, but she didn't falter. Her roar echoed again, a defiant sound that seemed to shake the courage of her enemies. Elias heard movement to his right. He turned and saw the hunters trying to flank them, climbing over the rocks. Not happening. He growled. He aimed carefully and fired. One went down instantly, but the other ducked behind cover and fired back, forcing Elias to retreat deeper behind the barrier. The dragon sensed it too. She swung her massive tail in a wide arc, smashing into the rocks where the flanker hid. The hunter was crushed under the force, his weapon clattering uselessly to the ground. Elias exhaled sharply. "Good hit," he said, though his voice trembled with adrenaline. But the hunters weren't done. The remaining ones regrouped, moving with military precision. They fired in unison, targeting Elias and the dragon with concentrated blasts. A shot hit one of Elias' shields, tearing it apart. Another struck the dragon's injured wing, and she let out a painful roar, stumbling slightly. "No," Elias muttered, crawling closer to her. "Stay with me," she growled low, almost as if answering him. He reached the explosive trap he had set earlier, hidden under a thin layer of loose stones. As the hunters advanced toward the outcrop's narrow path, Elias waited until three of them stepped onto it. Then he triggered it. The blast shook the ground, sending dust and debris into the air. The hunters were thrown violently to the ground, their armor cracked and sparking. Elias used the moment to fire again, taking out another one. There were only a few left now, but they were still dangerous. One of them broke off from the group, aiming directly for the dragonlings. Elias saw it and felt a surge of cold fury. "Not them," he growled. Sprinting across the rocky ground, he fired his rifle, hitting the hunter in the chest before he could reach them. The alien fell with a heavy thud, but Elias wasn't fast enough to dodge the return fire from the last two hunters. One blast hit his shoulder, spinning him around and sending him crashing to the ground. His rifle skidded out of reach, pain seared through his body, and for a moment, his vision blurred. The dragon roared. It wasn't just a warning this time. It was rage. She surged forward, ignoring her injuries. Her claws slammed into the ground, crushing one hunter instantly. She lunged at the last one, her massive jaws snapping shut around his weapon. With a violent twist, she threw him against the rocks, his body crumpling on impact. The battlefield fell silent. Elias lay on the ground, breathing hard, clutching his shoulder. He felt warmth beside him and turned his head. The dragon was there, crouched low, her golden eyes fixed on him. She had placed herself between him and the fallen hunters, her massive frame a shield. "You did it," he whispered weakly. She blinked slowly, lowering her head until it was close to his. For a long moment, they just stayed there, breathing together in the quiet after the storm. Elias forced himself to sit up, wincing in pain. The dragon watched him, her gaze softer now, almost grateful. He glanced at the dragonlings. They were safe, still huddled close together. "We made it," Elias said quietly. "Somehow." The dragon let out a low rumble, almost like an answer. Elias leaned back against a rock, exhausted. The fight had left him drained, but his heart felt lighter. They had survived together. He knew this wasn't the end. There could be more hunters. There could be worse things on this planet. But for now, they had won. He looked at the dragon, meeting her gaze. "You're not just surviving anymore, and neither am I," she blinked, slow and deliberate, as if agreeing. For the first time since the crash, Elias felt something he hadn't felt in days. Hope. The rocky outcrop was quiet again, but Elias knew it wouldn't last. The three hunters were dead, but others would come. Hunters never traveled alone. They worked in packs, sometimes even in full teams. And if these three didn't return, their companions would start searching. Elias sat with his back against a boulder, breathing slowly as his heart calmed. His rifle rested across his knees. He looked over at the dragon. She hadn't moved much since the fight ended. Her breathing was rough, and her wings twitched in pain. But her eyes were sharp, alert. She was watching him. "You held your ground," Elias said quietly, almost in awe. "Even hurt like that, You didn't give up. She blinked at him slowly, lowering her head slightly. It almost felt like acknowledgement. The dragonlings were huddled close against their mother. They were silent now, though their eyes were wide, still frightened by the noise and chaos of the battle. Elias took a deep breath and forced himself to stand. He couldn't afford to rest, not yet. He started by scavenging the fallen hunters. Their weapons were too large for him to use easily, but he managed to pull two small energy cells from their belts. He also took one of their scanners, a compact device shaped like a wristband. When he activated it, the display lit up with symbols he didn't recognize. Still, he could tell it was tracking something. They're definitely going to know you're here, he said to the dragon. That thing probably sent out your location before they even got close. The dragon let out a low rumble, shifting slightly. Elias wasn't sure if it was a sound of agreement or frustration. He turned the device off and pocketed it. We need to get ready. They won't stop until they have you. The rest of the day was spent working. Elias scavenged more wreckage from his ship, pulling out anything that could be useful. Pieces of armor plating, broken wiring, even part of the engine casing. He turned the plating into makeshift shields, placing them in key spots where he could crouch and fire without exposing himself completely. He also strung more of his noise-making traps across the paths leading up to the outcrop. As he worked, he kept talking. It helped him think, and maybe, in some strange way, it helped the dragon understand his intentions. You know, he said, while adjusting a piece of plating, back home, we'd call this a stronghold. Not much of one, but it's something. Gives us a fighting chance. The dragon watched him closely. She shifted her massive head slightly, almost as if she was following his movements with interest. Elias smiled faintly. You think I'm wasting my time, huh? Maybe I am. But I'm not going to sit and wait for them to come take you, or your little ones. When evening came, Elias forced himself to rest for a while. He sat near the dragon, leaning against one of the boulders. For the first time since the crash, he felt a strange sense of companionship. She wasn't human. She didn't speak his language. But in a way, she understood him. He looked at her carefully. Her scales were pale, almost glowing in the dim light. Her long neck curled protectively around her dragonlings. Even injured, she radiated strength. You know, he said softly, I used to think dragons were just stories, creatures people, invented to make themselves feel small. Now I know they're real. And you're more than any story could describe. The dragon blinked slowly, and Elias swore he saw her relax, just slightly. That night, he barely slept, every sound made. His body tense, he kept his rifle close, ready for anything. The dragon didn't sleep much either. Every few minutes, she would lift her head and scan the area, listening for danger. Elias wondered what she thought of him. Was he just some strange creature who happened to help her? Or did she see him as part of her group now? The thought made him strangely proud. By dawn, Elias had a plan. He gathered the fallen hunter's gear and set up a trap at the narrowest path leading to the outcrop. He attached one of their explosive devices to a pressure trigger he built using broken ship parts. It wasn't perfect, but it would make a powerful blast if someone stepped on it. He also placed reflective panels in key spots, angled so he could use them to spot movement before enemies got too close. It wasn't much, but it was something. When he was done, he walked to the dragon. She lifted her head, watching him carefully. I don't know if this will work, he admitted, but at least we won't be easy prey. The dragon rumbled softly, lowering her head closer to him. Elias stood still, letting her massive snout hover just inches away from his body. For a moment, he thought she might push him away. Instead, she simply sniffed him before pulling back. Elias smiled faintly. I'll take that as trust. By midday, his scanner picked up movement again. He climbed to a higher ledge and looked out over the rocky terrain. There they were. Not 3 this time, at least 6, maybe more. And they weren't moving cautiously anymore. They were moving with purpose. Elias felt his throat tighten. They had come for her, and this time, they were ready for a fight. He climbed back down quickly. They're coming, he told the dragon. Though she likely already sensed it, the dragon shifted, pulling. Her dragonlings close. Her golden eyes locked on him, sharp and fierce. Elias crouched beside her, resting his hand against the rock for balance. I don't know if we'll make it out of this, but I'm not leaving you, or them. The dragon's massive head lowered, slightly, close enough that he could see the faint scars across her snout. She let out a low rumble, not a growl, but a deep, resonant sound. Elias felt the meaning. Even if there were no words, they would fight together. As night began to fall, Elias checked his rifle one last time. The air felt heavier, tense. He could see their silhouettes in the distance now, moving through the rocky terrain. More hunters than before. Better armed. Elias crouched behind his makeshift barrier, his finger on the trigger. Beside him, the dragon rose slowly, her massive frame towering over him. Her wings twitched painfully, but her body shifted forward, ready to strike. For the first time since the crash, Elias didn't feel like he was just surviving. He felt like he had a purpose. They'll be here soon, he said quietly, glancing at her. Let's make sure they regret it. The dragon rumbled in response, a sound that echoed through the rocks like distant thunder. And together, they waited for the storm to come. The sun rose slowly over the alien horizon, casting a pale golden glow across the rocky terrain. Elias woke to the sound of soft movement nearby. The dragonlings were playing, bumping into one another with weak but playful nudges. Their mother lay close, her massive head resting on the ground as she watched them. Despite her wounds, there was something peaceful about the way she guarded them. Elias stretched, feeling the stiffness in his muscles. He had slept poorly again, waking every hour to the slightest sound. But there was no time to rest. The image of the hunters near the water still haunted him. They were close, too close. He picked up his rifle and checked it. The weapon was scratched, dented, but still functional. It wasn't powerful enough to take down an entire hunting party, but it was all he had. The dragon lifted her head as he moved, her golden eyes watching him. There was no growl this time. She seemed to recognize his routine now, always preparing, always busy. Morning, Elias said softly, though he knew she couldn't understand. We've got work to do. He spent the first few hours reinforcing the small defenses he had set up the day before. They were simple scraps of metal strung together to create noise when disturbed. Piles of sharp debris arranged to slow anyone approaching. They wouldn't stop the hunters, but they might buy time. As he worked, he spoke out loud, partly to himself and partly to the dragon. Back on Earth, we used to build walls, strong walls, big ones. But out here, all I can make are alarms. Better than nothing, right? The dragon blinked slowly, as if listening. Elias paused, wiping sweat from his forehead. You've seen them before, haven't you? The ones who did that to your wing. You know what they're capable of. The dragon didn't move, but her tail twitched slightly. Elias took that as agreement. By midday, the heat grew stronger. Elias decided to scout the area again. He needed to know where the hunters were. He checked his rifle, grabbed his small scanner, and began walking carefully through the rocky terrain. His boots crunched over loose soil, and every sound felt too loud. The scanner beeped faintly, picking up faint energy readings. Elias crouched behind a jagged stone outcrop, peering over the edge. There they were, 3 of them this time, tall, lean creatures in dark armor, moving with purpose. They carried long rifles and wore helmets that hid their faces. They weren't just wandering aimlessly, they were following a trail. Elias cursed under his breath. They were tracking the dragon. He couldn't hear their language clearly from this distance, but the way they gestured made it obvious. They had a plan. One pointed toward the direction of the dragon's nest, and the others nodded. Elias' stomach tightened. They knew where she was. He turned back, moving as quietly and quickly as he could. By the time he reached the outcrop where the dragon rested, his chest was tight from running. She immediately raised her head, growling softly at his sudden approach. Easy, he said, lowering his rifle. It's me. The growl faded, but her gaze stayed sharp, alert. She sensed his fear. They're coming, Elias said breathlessly. We don't have much time. He crouched beside her, looking into her golden eyes. Listen, you don't understand my words, but But you feel it. They're close. They want you. And if they find you, they won't spare your little ones. The dragon made a deep, low rumble in her chest, and her wings shifted painfully. Elias saw the frustration in her movement. She wanted to fight, to protect her young. But her body was too damaged. Elias took a deep breath. Then I guess it's up to me. The next hours were spent in tense preparation. Elias checked his rifle again and again, counting the remaining energy cells. Only 5 full charges left. He set up his makeshift noise traps more carefully, tightening the wires and adding sharp debris where he could. The dragon watched every movement. At one point, Elias felt her gaze heavy on him. He turned to her and sighed. I'm not much, I know, but I'll try. She blinked slowly, her massive head lowering slightly toward him for a moment. Elias felt something strange and quiet. Acknowledgement, a silent understanding that they were in this together. As the alien sun began to set, Elias heard it, a faint sound in the distance. The metallic clink of boots against stone. The hunters were coming. He gripped his rifle tightly and crouched low behind a boulder near the edge of the outcrop. His heart pounded in his chest. The dragon shifted, pulling her dragonlings closer. Beneath her body, she rumbled softly, as if warning them to stay still. Elias' breathing slowed as he saw movement. 3 figures emerged from the rocky path, moving carefully, scanning the area. Their helmets glowed faintly in the dim light. They were cautious but confident. Like predators closing in on prey. Elias raised his rifle, aiming carefully. His hands trembled slightly, but he forced himself to stay steady. One of the hunters moved closer, stepping right into one of his makeshift noise traps. The metal scraps clanged loudly, echoing through the outcrop. The hunter froze, raising his rifle. The others spread out, their movements sharp and precise. Elias didn't wait. He fired. The shot hit the first hunter in the shoulder, sending him stumbling back. The other 2 immediately turned toward Elias, returning fire. Blaster bolts struck the rocks around him, sending shards flying. Elias ducked, his heart racing. He fired again, forcing them to take cover. The dragon roared, the sound shaking the air. Even injured, her presence was terrifying. She shifted forward, placing herself between the hunters and her young. The hunters hesitated, clearly aware of the danger. Elias used the moment to move, scrambling to a better position behind another boulder. He fired again, aiming for their exposed joints. One of the hunters went down, his armor sparking. The others regrouped, firing in unison. Elias gritted his teeth. He couldn't keep this up for long. Then, to his surprise, the dragon lunged forward despite her injuries. Her massive tail swept across the ground, striking one of the hunters and sending him crashing into a rock wall. The last one turned to fire at her, but Elias took the shot. The blast hit the alien square in the chest, dropping him instantly. The silence after the fight felt heavy. Elias lowered his rifle, breathing hard. His ears rang from the sound of gunfire. The dragon stood still, her body shaking slightly from the effort. She growled low, scanning the area for more threats. Elias walked toward her slowly. It's over. For now, she looked down at him, her gaze softer than before. In that moment, Elias felt a clearly gratitude. They had fought together, and they had survived, but he knew this was only the beginning.